Perfect. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, buddy. So I've listened to you on stage a couple of weeks ago in Prague, it was, right? And, you talked about your language model that you work on at the moment. And I could clearly sense that you have this intrinsic motivation to do the right thing. Not just for yourself, but like also for humanity. Like, where does that come from?
Um, Honestly, I want to say that I'm these days less worried about the rest of humanity. It's just for me, I've got a inner compass that I just want to be better in a way that I don't know how to describe this. Like when you play a game, let's say a football, um, you want to win because you're the better player, not because the other player was retarded or because you cheated or because the ref was on your side or something like that, because it's like a fake win. And I think if everybody operated in that way, you'd have a excellence-driven society instead of a like a parasitic sort of people winning at the expense of winning, right? And I think that's the kind of world we live in today. So anyway, just something rubs me the wrong way around about that. Like I don't want to be the guy who gets in the ring and wins because somebody put poison in the opponent's water, right?
Yeah, like tearing down the house of the other person instead of building your own, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what you just said there is like it's a different example. It's the example that I sort of mentioned earlier. It's like you play a football game and you win because you were the better team, not because the referee gave you fake penalties, right? That's it's a very small difference, but I think it makes for a very different world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, understood. Yeah, so at least not at the expense of someone else, right? You can, we agree on that, right? Like
No,
there's
it can
different
be at the
approaches,
expense of
right?
someone else. No, it can be at the expense of someone else because when you're competing against someone else, and it's definitely going to be at the expense of them because there has to be a loser.
Okay,
Like
okay. Yeah, for
competitions
me
have
that
winner
means,
and loser.
for me that means like, kill someone off, right? Like the expense of someone else, right? Like
Mhm.
for me that's more harsh, but like I understand your point now. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, sometimes you need to kill your opponent. That's like,
In a
depending on
war.
the context, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Depending on the
Yeah.
context, that might need to be the case. But, doing it like there's an honorable way to win and there's a dishonorable way to win.
Mm.
And I think it's a very, very slight nuance. And I think it's very much lost on modern civilization. We had that with the ancients for sure. Like you look at, just the way Alexander the Great, for example, treated Darius's family when he won the initial battle of Gaugamela. Was it Gaugamela or Issus? I can't remember which one was the first one now. And you know, Darius thought that okay, this crazy young quote unquote barbarian is going to now kill off the family, hold them ransom, this and that. Alexander did nothing of the kind. He took the family and he maintained their entire royal tent, gave them the exact same privileges as they had as the royal family, as the of the Persian Empire, and in fact when it came time for him to return the Persian royal family, they all chose to stay with Alexander because of how well they were treated. So, like, he could have well have just put them at, knife point, could have killed them. Easy, easy. He had them in his
Yeah.
custody. But that was not the honorable thing to do. Alexander wanted to defeat Darius fair and square on the battlefield. And that's a very different approach to life than okay, let's fucking poison the water of the enemy and they beat them that way. It's like comes from a different place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, stoicism also goes into that area, right? Like I think you're also very supportive of that. So let's go back a little bit. Your parents are from Macedonia, right?
Originally, yes.
Both of them. Okay. So
Hmm.
when did you emigrate to Australia?
I didn't. I was born there.
You were
I was
born there.
born. So yeah, I didn't
So
know
they
much of the
left.
old country.
Yeah. Did they leave before Yugoslavia was like torn apart, or was that while? Because
I think my
I don't know
dad
when your birthday
left.
is.
Yeah, I'm in the late 80s. So like, my dad left in the, dare say, like late 60s, I think, or mid to late 60s. My dad left, and then he didn't. My mum didn't. My mum and dad met in the 80s, right? So he went back there. They married, and then he brought her back. So that was she. You know, she was 20 years later,
Yeah.
with respect to coming to Australia.
So like, did you feel anything of that situation that happened there? Like in terms of, the turmoil and stuff? Nothing? Nothing?
I don't know
Yeah,
shit
that's
about it.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, nice. Yeah, because my mom, she's from Croatia, and
Hmm.
yeah, I think about like these type of topics quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, geopolitics is also a topic that you also think about quite often, right? Um, like when did you realize that you were different with your thought process, right? Like, was that
Yeah.
was that early on, like in school, like me getting kicked out of school because I asked too many questions? and
Yeah, yeah. I
like,
was always,
yeah.
yeah, I was always the bad boy. And then I remember there was a period, man, it was really strange. I was in grade maybe 8 or 9, and for some strange reason, like me and my, friend of mine, we were both like really good at talking, and we, and I mean, I'll probably never find these diaries again, but we wrote all this stuff about how, politically Australia was doing the wrong things, blah blah. And I can almost, I would guess that I was probably like a little bit of a, young woke lefty back then, like before the concept was real. But like I was this, talking about like these revolutionary ideas and shit like that. And I was like a 13, 14-year-old kid or whatever the hell I was, didn't know my face from my ass really. But I remember like being, thinking about things, and my uncle actually saying, reading this stuff, and he, my uncle was very always politically inclined, and he read the stuff and he's like, you're gonna, your thinking is very different. So yeah, like I was a very young, very driven, hungry, young sort of individual. But I mean, like most young people, like, you're basically stupid until you hit your 30s. Really, like, maybe we used to mature a little bit younger earlier on, but I think uh, what I lacked really was clear direction from someone mature and someone, to guide. Because I left home when I was young. Like, I figured it all out myself. I made every single mistake you could possibly imagine making, and that's made me wiser in many ways. And I think, it's given me a depth of wisdom about the world. But the price I've had to pay for that wisdom is every, as I said, mistake you could possibly make as a 20-year-old entrepreneur and all that sort of stuff. Which I think is why my writing, in some ways, resonates with people. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Did you like start writing like as a therapeutic kind of setup, or were you
Yeah, I
always
used
kind of,
to. Yeah,
yeah?
I like, I've got writing on my Apple Notes that goes back about, over a decade, from my early 20s. In fact, way over a decade, like probably back to 2008, nine. And yeah, like, sometimes it's funny. I'll just like scroll back through and read some of the old notes, and there's some good stuff in there. Like, I was very into philosophy. Like, I used to read a lot from Bruce Lee. I was a big Alan Watts fan when I was young. All
Mm.
this sort of stuff. So yeah, it was only really in 2016 that I started writing online on Medium, and then I kind of stumbled into Bitcoin and started writing about Bitcoin in 2017. And 2018, I kind of landed on the map. There was like there was almost like the rise of Bitcoin writers for a period of time there between 2018 and probably 2021. There was like the golden age of Bitcoin literature,
Mhm.
and there was great stuff. Like stuff from Robert Breedlove, from Gigi, from Eric Kaysen, Alan Farrington, Nick Carter. Like, there was really good thinking coming out during that period. And yeah, I think I was glad to be a part of that sort of cohort of writers and thinkers in that period. And yeah, I've kind of like, I don't write as many essays or anything like that anymore these days. These days, I've been working on a new book, and I'll publish that. I've got a bunch of books in my head that it's impossible to find the time to do everything that I want to do, but I'll be aiming to publish those at least one a year for the next 10 years. Maybe if I get to more, I'll get to more.
Yeah. So basically you working on Amber full time? Are you still CEO for that, or?
No. I left about 2 years ago.
You left 2 years ago, so now
Yeah,
you're doing what we're gonna talk about later, so the language model basically.
Correct. Yeah. So Amber was like the first Bitcoin only dollar cost averaging app in the world, and like we inspired a whole industry like Swan, Relay, like everyone. There's a Amber DCA. Sorry, there's a Bitcoin DCA product in every country now, basically. So we kicked off that that trend, and then I left in 2021 in December, or I guess January 2022, whatever. And I decided to take a year off, get married. I went and wrote the UnCommunist Manifesto, and that sort of hit the bestseller list. Got us on Alex Jones and all sorts of things. Thank you, sir. So yeah, we did that, and then last year I kind of caught the itch, wanting to just do another business again, and then I went a little bit down the AI rabbit hole, which I've come to realize is a little bit like crypto. It's over indexed, way over exaggerated, overhyped, but like any tool, there's utility there, and I think as an entrepreneur, it's your job to work out what the utility is and actually go and solve some problems with the damn thing. So that's what we're in the process of doing now.
Nice. Yeah, so I got the book, right? I don't read books like from start to finish, but I'm just like jumping through the ADD thing, but you're basically a proponent of the best, being the best version of yourself, right? It's like you also talk about the family unit, code of ethics of the samurai. I heard you talk about, right? Männerbund is also super interesting, right? So I'm born in Germany, so yeah, we would. I mean, we should talk more about these topics, right? But like, just in general, I really appreciate you talking about these topics, right? Like me during COVID, basically, I realized what was going on and started buying up land. So now we got like 20 acres so far.
Nice.
Here in Croatia, and we're gonna build a retreat center and like take care of these kind of topics more, right? So
amazing.
Any topic of those that you want to pick out and elaborate a bit more, like why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, we can, maybe the Mannerbund thread is very important. So like, I actually fundamentally believe the reason the world is retarded is not just like a lot of Bitcoiners will tell you, you fix the money, fix the world, but to fix the money, first you need to have the rise of strong men. And I say men specifically, not women, because men are the not only the gender, but the energy, the masculine energy is that which brings order. Fundamentally, that's what it represents. The masculine is the ordered energy. And, we are living in a world of disorder. We are living in a world that is breaking down borders. We are living in a world that is about inclusivity instead of strong structural internal integrity, right? And if you look back on, sort of what happened with the world, and particularly with the French Revolution, right? You had the tearing down of the patriarchy. Now, granted, the patriarchy at that point had become quite weak. Louis XVI was a pussy. He was very different to Louis XIV. Like had Louis XIV been around when the French Revolution happened, there would have been no French Revolution, right? All of the, the Robespierre and all the, the proto-Marxists, basically, the Jacobins were the proto-Marxists. They would have been put to the sword, they would have been killed off, and that's it. In Europe, France would still be the strongest country in the world to date. Like, the monarchies would still exist. We probably wouldn't have had World War I and World War II. None of that stuff would have happened. But unfortunately, there was this thing happened, right? And what that led to was the metaphorical destruction of the order, not only in the state but also in the household. So one of the big drivers, or one of the big initiatives in the French Revolution, was the dismantling of the father's power within the household, and that power ended up being placed in the hands of the state. And you had basically the makings of the modern state during that period of time. You had, like, up until that time, there was clear, that the father was the head of the household. The wealth would pass to the first son, and the first son would take the responsibility to maintain and develop the family's wealth, right? They removed all of that, and then what you ended up having was, like, for the first time, women coming into wealth who didn't know what the fuck to do with it, and all of the children bickering about the wealth, and then over a generation or two squandering everything. So you had this, like, wealth passed down through multiple generations, within a generation or two get fucking completely squandered, because the system that was functioning up until that point got thrown upside down. And you keep sort of fast forwarding, and like these things aren't like, it's not like French Revolution happened and then the next day it was like a disaster. These cultural shifts take quite a bit of time. So Napoleon was an attempt to in some ways I don't say reverse, but kind of integrate some elements of those changes with this sort of new dynamic, energy. And Napoleon was practically a monarchist, but he knew how to get the people behind him. He was this grand leader, this powerful leader, this Übermensch. And Nietzsche had a lot of respect for Napoleon, and unfortunately he didn't succeed. And then after him, there was like a period of so-called relative peace until obviously we had World War One, and then World War One killed off an immense amount of strong men in Europe, like huge amount, and then whatever was left, the children of those men basically got wiped out in World War Two. So post World War II, like, the only country that still had some sort of masculinity left was really America. And you see Europe kind of devolved and disintegrated and all this sort of stuff. America had a boom, but America ended up with its own problems, with countless war efforts, and then like the civil rights movement started like changing the power structures and all this sort of stuff. And America slowly became more liberal. The communistic ideas sort of infiltrated it, and you have this constant progression towards less strong men, and then any strong men that sort of remained, not like basically positioning it as a bad thing to form, a men's association, right? Like these days, we don't have those same kind of men's associations. Like there's this bond amongst men. And what that does is it creates a vacuum, like that the state fills. And, whenever the state fills a vacuum, we sort of know what happens. Like everything just gets worse. So anyway, that's like, I think that is probably one of the biggest things that is lacking in the world today is, these small associations of groups of men. And the funny thing is, like, you can't stop it from happening. So when you do try and suppress it, what ends up happening is you end up getting gangs. You get the worst kind of, male associations, right? So instead of like these strong, noble groups forming, you get fucking petty gangs and like little criminals and all this sort of shit, which is the wrong fucking way to go about it. So anyway, that's sort of where we are now. Like we're in a weird state, lack of a Mannerbund, lack of strong structure and order, lack of anything like that is more grassroots ordered, and now there's like, in the absence of that, there's this attempt to like impose order from the top, and it's just not working, and it's broken. Everyone feels lost. There's no meaning. We are simultaneously we're not allowed to be responsible for ourselves, but we have to simultaneously be responsible for everyone and everything that we can't possibly be responsible for, right? We're responsible now for being born white and a man, and a Westerner. You're responsible for the fucking climate. You're responsible for fat people who wear masks and, get sick or whatever. Like, responsible for all the fucking things you can't be responsible for, but the things you want to be responsible for yourself, you're not allowed to be. So it's like such a fucking inversion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting what you just said, like all of it, because I think about that a lot. Especially, I mean, the divide and conquer. I mean, it's not just with countries; it's literally with the family now, right? I mean, I don't know how it was with you, but the school system that I was in was basically the same one that my dad had, right? Like exactly the same structure. There was nothing improving. There was no, let's say, new approach to anything, right? We didn't have any new subjects. Like literally just wandering around for 10 years, whatever long structure you chose. And I was lucky because I went to the UK after 10th grade, I think, and finished school there, because I probably wouldn't have finished school in Germany in public school, because I was just like like this with the teachers all the time, right? Because you weren't allowed to ask questions, right? Like anything that I asked about history that I wanted to actually know, they kind of blocked me off because they didn't want me to know. But like, let's say, sorry, from my childhood, here in Dalmatia in Croatia, where I'm at right now, at my grandma's place, couldn't leave the street. The big signs with the skulls. There's still mines there. Okay, why the fuck are there still mines there, right? And you talk to the family, they tell you one story. You talk to the friends from, let's say, the north of Croatia, it's a completely different story. Then you go to the teachers in Germany, it's another story, right? And that's how I kind of, I'm like, okay, something's going on here. Like, doesn't make any sense, right? Like, so started, going into these books, read about oil, read about geopolitics, all that kind of stuff, and then you go down the rabbit hole, which you've been in probably as well at some point for a long period. But you have to go through it, right? Like, we have to invest the time ourselves, otherwise, we're not gonna get there. Yeah. So, do you think this is there's a solution to this? Do you think we can still, kind of save our little microcosm in a way? Because I mean, in my 20s, I was living life, because I realized, okay, the world is quite fucked up. Let's just focus on me, and that's the only thing I can do, right? And then now I have a son, and everything changed, right? So now it's like, let's build a legacy still. Let's try, let's turn that thing around. And that's why also, going back to what I said before, we're building the structure, right? We're building like this environment where we can actually host these kind of meetups, and we can host these events. So are you positive that there's a hope?
Of course, yeah. I'm eternally positive. Like, as much as, like, people think I'm pessimistic because, like, I hate the world, like, and I hate most people, and people are fucking stupid, and I call them sheeple and lemmings and dumbasses and NPCs and all this sort of stuff, right? And people think I'm somehow pessimistic, but I'm actually not. The thing is, that which is life affirming will always win, right? Because life seeks to extend itself. So if you're a fucking tranny, chopped your dick off, and colored your hair blue, and sitting there waving a fucking rainbow flag, you're not going to have any descendants. So you just scored an own goal. You have literally wiped yourself off. These people talking about, like, abortion, blah blah blah. Killing off their kids. Well, they're going to be gone in a generation or two. Like, the vegans who are, like, so excited about eating bugs and fake meat and everything like that, they're going to get cancer. They're going to kill themselves. So, like, these sort of all of these dumbass ideologies are self-defeating. Like, and whenever you have a self-defeating like, there's a classic saying from Sun Tzu, if you're like, and I'm going to butcher this, but if your enemy is busy defeating itself, your job is not to get in the way. Like, let them fucking lose. And it's obviously not as clean as that, because we are subject to a lot of this stupidity in the world. So, like, obviously what happened with the mask mandates and everything like that, we were surrounded by these fucking idiots. Like, I would get on a train, like, I was actually arguing with someone on Twitter the other day, and someone made a tweet about, like, the World Economic Forum is is passing a law about like a vaccine registry, and they did this without your vote. And my comment to it was like, I'm like, well, most people would have voted for this anyway. So like that last part didn't have to be there because most people are fucking stupid. That's the thing. So it doesn't matter. So I guess it comes down to like, we just need to outlast. And I think we can. I think the world is, large enough, complex enough. And the monkeys who are trying to impose stuff have enough problems of their own, that, they can't, like, they can maybe make an example out of a few of us, but they can't make an example out of all of us. So we just need to keep building parallel systems, living a parallel life. Like, it's very, very important to hold any, wealth that you have in Bitcoin, so that way it's just untouchable. And just opt out in every single way that you possibly can. Like, set yourself up so you have a tax-free residency, so you're not paying fucking tax to any of these scumbags. Set yourself up so that your wealth is in Bitcoin, so nobody can take it, so it's not sitting in a bank. Find ways to eat local and all this sort of stuff. Like, build these networks. Like, all of this sort of stuff is things you can do. Because at some point things are going to get stupid, and I mean, the danger does exist that, like, with all this focus on like climate change and blah 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 blah, like, what they're doing is like to try and like this is the thing, to try and hold up a false agenda requires energy, and energy, these days the allocation of energy happens through the allocation of resources, and that resource is generally money, right? So for them to keep fake problems in front of people's face and attention, they need to spend money, and to spend money they need to print money. But in printing money and in doing all of this sort of stuff, debasing the money and taxing people, and creating larger debt, what they're doing is they're devaluing the purchasing power of the money. So what's happening is people can't afford to eat, they can't afford to live, and all this sort of stuff. So they're sort of reaching that breaking point. Like, people have no more savings and all this sort of stuff. So less and less people are going to care about climate change and fucking eating the bugs and all this sort of stuff that they're being told to do. Like, oh, you have to get back. Like, less and less people are going to care. So the good thing there is that these philosophies, these agendas are self-defeating. The dangerous part, though, is if they can successfully blame you and me for this problem, right? So it's those guys. Look, that guy there, he's eating beef, and he's living in a nice 20-acre plot, and he's got cold plungers and saunas and everything like that. He's the bourgeoisie making money online. Like, go and get him. It's his fault that the price of food is going up. It's his fault that this and this, because he's greedy, because he's capitalist and all that sort of stuff. That is where the danger lies, and that's where we, as like people with a brain, actually need to figure out how to really defend ourselves. And who knows what's going to happen in the world. I was speaking with a friend, and he was like, bro, I'm going to get into, like, after I finish building my Bitcoin business, I'm going to get into the drone and micro weapons manufacturing, because at some point the zombies are going to come after us. And we're gonna honestly, as dystopian and fucked up as it sounds, like, we might need to do that. I'm not saying it's definite that we'll have to do that, but that's like a worst case scenario. If shit gets like bad and people need someone to blame, and they can't touch the politician, they're gonna touch the neighbor, and that is a risky situation.
That's what happened in Germany during the mask thing. They were literally, there was neighbors calling the police because there's like 3 people in the neighbor's apartment. Which boosted me right into our past, our German past, which usually people should have learned a little bit of history, but didn't work out that way. Super interesting. You prioritize your health, right? I mean, when I saw you, it was clear. To be at this level of consciousness in life, right? I assume you also went through some heavy hardships. Was there like any turning point where you realize, okay, I have to really take care of my health, my mental health, and were also psychedelics part of your healing journey?
Not really to the last one. I was always health conscious when I was young. I mean, I grew up watching Van Damme, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Lee, right? And there was something about the '80s and the '90s that was, I don't know, there was a health orientation, right? So I never wanted to be fat. I think my dad sort of instilled a little bit of that in me. Like, my dad was, he was fit, definitely for his age, and he was always like, you know, kind of extolling those kind of ideas and virtues. So, I mean, I was very radical about my health, though, both me and my brother, in kind of different ways. Like, I was always looking for the elixir of, longevity. I went vegan for fucking 2 years and then realized it was retarded, and, moved away from that. So like I've done and tried all sorts of things, and where I've sort of come to these days is the understanding that, hey, you know everyone's got a slightly different body. You need to figure out what works for you, but also you don't need to be fucking anal about it. And in fact, you know stressing about food actually has more of an impact on your health than just eating. And like, so long as you like, I always laugh at like the carnivores and like the all the super strict motherfuckers like that. I was like, bro, just have a fucking croissant,
Yeah,
like, and like
balance.
eat a fucking, I know one thing me and my wife do on the weekends, for example, is we do French toast. Now, we don't just do shit French toast. We get beautiful
Yeah,
sourdough that is baked locally. We have our free range eggs, and we have our honey from the farmers market, and it's the fucking beautiful French toast. But like, you show that to a carnival, they'll freak out. They're like, oh bro, carbs and shit. It's like, shut the fuck up. So like, I think health is like there's some maturity to it. And this is again why I love Europe. Like, you have France and Italy and stuff like that, the home of cultured food. What do they have? Pizza, pasta, lasagna, like croissants, all that sort of stuff. It's fucking amazing. That shit tastes amazing. And like, I've become like a cultured food maximalist. And you want to have food that is obviously as natural as possible. So just get rid of all the processed shit in a box, basically any of the shit that comes from America. Just eat normal real food. But I guess you have some exception, which is some people do have particular deficiencies. Like, for example, onions are a food. Onions bloat the fuck out of me. I just can't eat onions, right? So like, also, like, I've got to be very careful with mixing too many foods together. So even though, like, I love, my wife makes the best lasagna, even though I fucking love it, I've got to kind of take it in moderation. I'm better like mixing very simple food groups, and I do better. So you just got to kind of like learn that about yourself. So that's one thing. What I will say is, I never respected sleep well enough in my 20s. So in my 20s, man, I fucking burnt the candle at both ends. Like, building businesses, fucking traveling, pushing shit uphill. Like, I was always on, always on, always on, always on, always on. And I used to, throughout my 20s, basically, the saying was, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And man, I'm paying for that shit now. Like, I'm probably healthier than your average person my age, in his mid 30s, but I had I respected sleep more, and had I done that, I think I'd be 10 times better off now. Like, these days, I definitely just don't have the fucking energy. And I'm very hesitant, to call that, oh yeah, well, that's what happens in your mid 30s, because that's a fucking cop out. I know that I paid the price for doing this shit.
yeah.
So anyway, that's on health. I mean, I don't know if you got any threads to pull on there, but we can then go into psychedelics if you want.
No, I mean, it's technically the same thing with me. Just super fast life in the 20s. Like, travel a lot all over the place, and move places every couple of months. Never stayed in a place for longer than 2 years, right? Like, lives in South America, Spain, all these kind of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that we get around. I think it's good to do it in your early 20s, right? Because then
When
you
you have the
understand a little
energy,
bit
of
how the world
course.
works. Yeah, when you
Exactly.
understand how the world works, when you've been to India, and see what happens when the people are in a monsoon, right? Then you appreciate a little bit more like where you come from, I guess. But yeah, it's important, I think. And also the sleep. I mean, I prioritize it now as well. I mean, I go to bed
Mm-hmm.
at 10 at the latest, right? I mean, and get up
Yeah.
quite early these days. But
Yeah, the most
yeah,
expensive
it's
thing in my house now is the mattress. I actually went and I
mm,
fucking bought the best mattress I could fucking find. And like I literally, I was saying just before the call, like we just moved into the new place, so like I've had 2 nights of sleeping on the new mattress, and like I mean, unfortunately, I'm still jet lagged, so I haven't been able to sleep properly. But I know that over the coming weeks, as I sort of settle in, the mattress for me is just fundamentally important. And I lived 4 years or 4.5 years as a nomad. Honestly, man, like I think that was my first half of my 30s. As much as like nomading is cool, honestly, I think it's a psyop.
Yeah.
I think it's designed to like, and I don't know if it's intentional or just an accident of youth and stupidity and the fact that society is so lost. But nomading basically, you sure you see a bunch of things, but you develop no roots to a particular place. You develop no depth of knowledge about a particular place. Like there's something about someone who's lived somewhere for 10 years and knows all of the best spots, knows all of the hidden areas, knows the fucking like knows a place, right? You develop roots somewhere, and if you're just a nomad, you're like a fucking pot plant, basically. You're just like moving around from places, and you're never going to be strong. There's no depth there, and you're sleeping on a fucking different bed every week, every month, every whatever.
That doesn't work.
You like it's your routine is fucked up. Everything costs twice as much because you don't know the hacks. Everything takes twice as long because you don't know the hacks. Like, man, I think back on my first half of my 30s, I'm like, you fucking idiot. Like, you could have done so much more. But, the trick to life is, when you make those mistakes, then you have to find something from that and use it. And, that's, I guess, what I have to
Yeah.
do now because I didn't get to build the roots.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the issue here is that people kind of run away from stuff, right? Not to say that, like the digital nomads, I mean, just in general, like the travel culture, right? Like hopping from hostel to hostel and that kind of stuff. Just they don't want to go inwards. And I understand, right? Like when you're in your early 20s, it's so far away, right? To go inwards and look for the solutions. But yeah, I mean, what you said is spot on.
Yeah, there's a difference between like, so you look at the conquistadors, they crossed the fucking open seas and they conquered a continent. Like there was a direction for the travel. Nomads don't have a direction, they don't have a purpose, they're just traveling.
Yeah.
I'm going to a fucking hostel. Why? Oh yeah, I'm gonna check out this place, gonna go to a festival, gonna
Yeah, go
party,
through the
like
travel book. Just tick the box. Yeah.
exactly. Like it's
Yeah.
there was a very different reason. Like our forefathers had a destination. They had a destiny. Like I'm going there to fucking like Alexander the Great crossed on foot from Macedonia through to fucking India, through snow, through mountains, through deserts, through rivers, through fucking wars and everything like that to do what? To see the end of the earth.
Hmm.
That is very different to going and checking out all the vegan cafes around the world. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, that's what
Yeah,
the
but
fuck.
that goes back to what we said before, right? Like I think the problem is in the school system, right? Because nobody actually learns anything there. Like you don't find your purpose. You don't find any subject that you're really interested in because you don't have the time to, to put your head into it and
You're
like and your
distracted. Yeah.
mind into it to actually excel at something, right? Especially as men, when we're young, we need that. Like for me, it was gaming. Like I got lost in gaming during school. I was gaming like 8 hours after school, and I was good at it, and that's what I was doing. Didn't learn shit for school, just did the stuff that I needed to quickly in the morning or like just before the lesson, and that was it. And that's where people go afterwards, right? They go on a trip because they think they will find themselves there,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
it's a big issue here because I think it's such a waste of time to put your kid in school these
Yeah.
days.
I mean,
It's crazy.
you waste 15 years in school or whatever it is, and then you waste another 10 years trying to find yourself out in the world, and then you're 30, 35, and then you're like, oh fuck, I'm starting to feel lonely, and now there's less available options in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And then you like, and we're suffering from that epidemic now. Like, you got all these fucking mid-30s women who are freaking out because now they can't find anyone. Because no dude wants, like, and I don't mean this in a bad way. It's not a nice thing to say, but like a woman's sexual market value shrinks by multiple orders of magnitude between 30 to 35, and then after 35 it's fucked. Like
Yeah.
you're not as fertile. Like it is, and some women will say, oh yeah, but what if I just want a career? I'm like, Sure, but no, there's a fucking price to pay. When you turn 40 and no dude wants to marry you anymore and you can't have any fucking kids, what are you going to do? You're just going to become a crazy cat lady, or you're just going to, be a fake man basically for whatever the rest of your life. It's like, if you are conscious of that cost and that is what you want and that's the life you want to live, sure, go for it. But don't sit here and tell me that, somehow you can have all of it, and there's no consequences to the decisions you're making. There is. Yeah. And like I'm the first one to say, I was fucking late. I should have got married 10 years ago. I should have started having kids early. I should have done all that. But I was infected by the stupidity of modern society. I was I didn't have a strong father figure or something like that to sort of guide and direct me. I didn't have roots to, like a family tree or something like that. I wish I had that. I wish I'd made some of those decisions younger. But like I said, I'm not here to sit here and like complain and regret and all this sort of stuff. But I'm the first to say I fucking made the mistake, so I can tell you not to make the same mistake. The 10 years now that I'm having kids later than what I should have, someone will say, oh, well, you got 10 years more to spend by yourself. Yeah, sure. But I also have 10 years less to spend with my son when I'm older. That's not a great realization. Yeah. So so everything has a consequence. You can't escape the cost of your decisions. And, that to me is like extraordinarily important and just undervalued in society. Like we live in a world where people want rights without the responsibility for those rights, right? Like, it's not how it fucking works, man. Like, there is a like Newton's second law. For every action, there is a reaction. Like, and that happens physically, metaphysically speaking, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have some similarities here. Like, definitely, it was my life in the 20s as well. Just like completely, let's say, fucked off with society and said, okay, fuck this. Don't see any point in this. And maybe the segue here, you also talked about being trapped in that lone wolf kind of mentality. Was that then like that
very much so? Yeah, I've always been a lone wolf. Always. I was always the lone wolf. I always I identified with that thing, and once again, now that I'm a little bit more mature, particularly over the last 2 years, I've realized, the lone wolf is a scam. It's a fucking scam. Like the nomading, the lone wolfing, all that sort of stuff. It's stupid. The lone wolf is the one that dies, bro. It's the pack that wins. And there is it really, really viscerally dawned on me when I went, I read the book, The Virtues of War, which is the story of Alexander the Great, by Stephen Pressfield. And it's historical fiction, but it just dawned on me him and his basically his cousins, closest friends, they were like brothers. 10 of them practically conquered the entire world. Each of them would have fucking died for each other. And each of them fought to be at each other's fucking right, and they saved each other. They bled together. They fucking traveled together. They lived together, died together. Man, that sort of camaraderie, companionship is it's non-existent. I mean, where it does exist, and you start to follow this thread, you see there's big changes in the world, like the PayPal mafia. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, those guys. They fucking transformed the web and everything that we use today because they were a tight-knit crew. So that is a real thing. And once again, like I said, the Mannerbund has been dismantled, and a lot of us idiots, and I put my hand up as one of those idiots who has hopefully grown a brain now, have realized that you need to have this male fraternity around you. And women need their female fraternity. They need their fucking girlfriends. They need to gossip. They need to talk. They need to be around good energy. I'm all for example, segregating gyms. There's a men's gym. You fucking go there, train, you lift tires, you fucking yell, scream, all that sort of stuff. Go have a girls' gym. You girls can do whatever the fuck you want to do. Don't mix the two. Girl and boys' schools, 100%. Fuck co-ed. Let them do their own things. Men and women, we're biologically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, physically, we're different in every fucking way. And the more we blend the two together, the more we bring ourselves closer to each other, and we lose polarity. And when you lose polarity, you lose identity, you lose strength, you lose charge, you lose energy, and it has all these downstream effects on everything else throughout civilization.
Yeah, true. Especially because our development is completely inverse, right?
Correct.
Like it's
Yeah.
impossible to be together at the same age, kind of, right? Which they force us to be with,
Yeah.
and it creates conflict. It creates like tension all the time. It creates depression in us.
Confusion. Yeah,
Exactly.
confusion.
Depression in young males, like like it's through the roof for sure. Yeah, crazy stuff.
The last thing I was going to say, this I want to tie some of this into psychedelics, because like I've got a very contrarian viewpoint on psychedelics. I'm actually very skeptical on psychedelics and psychedelic use. I don't think people should use it regularly. I think it should be I actually think it should be restricted, like it was restricted in the ancient times, because there's a couple of reasons. Number one, and I'm writing a whole article on this. And I say this as someone who, I did psychedelics for the first time. I did mushrooms when I was 32, so like 4 or 5 years ago. And I've never had anything but a fantastic experience on it. Okay. But I have the groundedness and the maturity to do something with that experience. And I believe very few people do. And that's not to blow smoke up my own ass. That is just to say, most people are mask wearing, jab fucking taking morons. And when you take a psychedelic and you give it to a person like that, more often than not, they become more open. They become more stupid. So psychedelics have the propensity to basically disintegrate particular connections in your brain and open you up more. Now, the danger with opening people up more is we already live in a fucking open, feminized society. So psychedelics actually, on the spectrum, effeminate you a little bit, because the masculine is a energy of sobriety. It's an energy of groundedness, whereas the femininity is an energy of elevation. Femininity is an energy of chaos, of lack of borders, of disintegration, of oneness. So psychedelics fundamentally push you more to that side. Now, it's important, if you are a masculine male, if you are fucking grounded, if you're strong, if you need to get out of like a blockage, or you are in your zone, and you're fucking like, sometimes you need to come out of the weeds, and you need to see the fucking plateau. In that sense, yes, it's warranted to do so. But most people are not like that. Most people are fucking pussies. They're lost already. They take psychedelics and they think they found the answer, but all they did was they took concepts which may make sense in the spiritual realm, and then they try and apply it to the physical realm. Like, for example, I actually believe, well, it's not just the work, but things like, this is a contrarian view. I actually think communism as a concept comes from the physical, metaphysical realm. So like spiritual realm. In the spiritual realm, you have no property rights. That doesn't exist. There is no borders, there is no barriers. Everything sort of blends into one. You go there and, you come to think of this idea, bro, we're all one. Why do we need borders? Why do we need nationalities? Why do we need this separation between us? We're all together. No, in the physical realm, we have property rights. We have differentiation. We have individuality, the whole point of the physical realm. And I believe the reason we as spirits come to this world is to have a physical experience and to learn property rights, to learn differentiation that adds a different dimension to our entire being. If we go and then take psychedelics and go back to the spiritual realm and bring those lessons here, we are taking the wrong fucking lessons. So I think there's a big misconception. So I think it's a powerful tool if used correctly, but I think 99% of people who think they use it correctly use it incorrectly. And then, 100% of the people who don't know what they're doing are using it wrong already, which means there's like 0.001% of the people have any fucking concept, which is, you look at the ancients, The ancients, the way they used to use hallucinogenics and psychedelics was on a very, 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 very rare basis. And you would have to train for multiple years. You'd have to prepare yourself mentally and physically and earn the right to do this.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore. We don't have any rites of passage. You know,
Nothing.
we've Americanized psychedelics. Like it's now a therapeutic thing. No, this is not a fucking therapeutic thing. Like it's not for therapy. Like, you know, now you've got these monkeys doing fucking MDMA for therapy and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
No. You know what you need for fucking therapy if you're a guy? You need to go out there and get the shit kicked out of you in a fucking jiu-jitsu gym. You need to go and lift some weights. You need to go and build something with your hand. You need to build a fucking business. You need to grow some balls. You need to have some fucking family. You need to construct something. You don't need to deconstruct yourself further with fucking psychedelics. No, wrong fucking thing. If you're a woman, you need to go and get fucking impregnated. You need to learn how to be a good wife to your fucking husband. You need to learn how to clean the house. You need to learn how to fucking cultivate your energy. You need to look after your health. Like, these are the things, that's the therapy we need, not fucking MDMA and psychedelics and deconstructing more of our brain and, you know, creating more confusion. So, you know, this is my contrarian viewpoint. I think it's like way overused, and it's you know, sort of seen as a solution, as a panacea, where it's I think it's probably doing more damage to people than they realize. So anyway, happy to hear a contrarian viewpoint on that. Like if you want to counter any of that, but yeah, I've got some strong and different opinions on this.
I also listened to the podcast that you had with these two guys on your podcast. Super interesting take, but I mean, for me personally, it's one of those things where, you know, people just always like to grab the fast kind of, you know, thing, right? They want to grab the pill, they want the fast result, and it's just not going to work. And it's going to, just like you said, it's going to make everything worse 100% if you don't, you know, if you don't do it with the right, you know, person, the right environment, with the right teacher, if, you know, whatever you want to call them.
For the right reasons.
For the right reasons, exactly, and all the things that you you know, counted up before. You know, you have to do those first, right? Like,
yes.
You have to try everything else first, and then if you see, okay, there's something that's like deeply ingrained in me, you know, maybe over like epigenetically, whatever, right? Then I think there's a chance that you can grab that. You know, for me, it was alcoholism, right? Like strongly ingrained, you know, from my grandfather. And yeah, I mean, I found a solution, right? But I did the work beforehand. You know, you have to really put your head down and try everything else, and then also integrate, and not just go there, you know, and pop something, and then, you know, 5 hours later you're fine. It's just not going to work like that.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, the amount of people I know now, it's like every time they get fucking stressed out, you know, life is hard. They, you know what? I think the way to fix this is I need to go to Peru and do another ceremony. That's how I'll fix this. I'm like,
yeah, and they do like 20 of those, and there's
yeah,
still
exactly.
something. Yeah.
Well, it's not that there's still something. They're actually more fucking retarded than when they first started.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's always like something new, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, you know, and I mean, there's maybe one other thing I'll just sort of point out is, like, we were talking about cost before, right? Like, everything has a cost. And I think this is not spoken about enough in psychedelic space, is that what is the cost of opening up your apertures to such a degree? And what is the cost of going into that realm, especially on a regular basis? Like, what does that do? Like, I actually think in many ways, like, the price you have to pay for, you know, if you even go there and get wisdom, like, so most people don't get wisdom, but those who do and get, like, let's say you are part of the 0.01% of people who go there for actual, like, you know, unblock a blockage or shake something up or go there for real wisdom, and you've done the work already, like, you are the perfect archetype. Even for us, or for those kind of people, there is a cost. And I believe that cost, like, you feel it the day after you've fucking done mushrooms. Like, you are in some ways drained, you know what I mean? Like, because you have used up some sort of life force, some sort of energy to acquire that. And, you know, I remember speaking with someone who was trying to explain to me, like, no, but like, psychedelics give you energy. I'm like, you are telling me that you can just, like, create energy out of nothing. No. Every bit of wisdom you acquire comes with a fucking cost. I'm sorry. Like, you can't sit here and tell me that it's like it came for free. Like, because and I'll tell you what, if any wisdom comes for free, it isn't fucking wisdom. It's a lie. It's a scam. You have to fucking pay something to go and get this. And like this is, a lot of the people in the psychedelic space do not talk about this stuff. Is like, what is the cost? And that doesn't mean like, you know, I paid $4,000 for the bed, so that I can fucking sleep on a good bed. The cost of earning that $4,000 was, sleepless nights and working and everything like that. So, but now I can sleep. So maybe the cost is worth it, and that's fine. But don't ignore the fact that there's a cost. You'll drain some of your life force in the path
Process.
to attaining this wisdom, and that's
Yeah,
okay.
definitely.
But be aware of
Definitely.
it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, spot on. Like nobody talks about that. That there's you just have to look at the language as well. Why is LSD sometimes called acid, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's actually, it's acid, right? And
Yeah.
there's going to be residue. So,
Yeah.
if you work with a proper healer afterwards, they will tell you there's some holes in your aura and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a cost that you're going to pay. But that download, whatever you were working on, if it's worth it, you have to work on whatever you fucked up as well afterwards, right? But that's what nobody does. They go back to the office job, put their head down and whatever they're working on, and they forget about it, right? And that's where it's just gonna get worse 100% in the future. Man, good topic, but I think we could go forever here. But should we, I wanted to touch upon your projects a little bit.
Yeah. We can touch on them really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, you have like a couple minutes. Did you you got Steve Jobs, right, out of one of your businesses?
Yeah. That
Is
was
that
a
what did you
couple
learn
years.
from that?
I mean, many things, obviously.
Like some deep
Honestly,
wisdom, like
yeah. Now that I'm older, I learned that I was inexperienced, and I probably deserve to be Steve Jobs out of it. Honestly,
mm,
like at the time, I thought, the reasons were, oh, don't build a big board and board of directors and like take things more slowly and have more control of the company and blah blah blah. But as much as those things helpful tactically speaking, if I put on my wise hat now, and now that I'm a little bit older, I was young, I was wild, I was stupid. I was a great CEO in terms of like I was very competent. I would do everything. I, if I could go back, I would spend more time with the chairman of the board, and work with him on like understanding, the role I was playing and being more humble and trying to like learn more, instead of like trying to lead more, because I was 26, 27. Like I was dumb. Like I can say that now. Like I was very smart for a 26, 27-year-old. I was very capable, very competent, very, dexterous. Like I was definitely beyond my years and my capacity to think and do stuff. Like I would blow people away. But fundamentally, I was from a maturity and managerial perspective. I was young and dumb, and it's funny. Like these days, I help some startup people, like young guys, etc., like do stuff, and I see almost that same energy in me. Like I suggest doing this. Sorry, it's my same energy in them, and then they want to do that, and I'm like, fucking hell. All right, well, what do I do? Do I let them figure it out themselves, or do I try? Like, so anyway, that's I got Steve, and I think Steve Jobs will tell you the same thing. He deserved also to be fired from Apple at the time because he was impetuous, he was angry, he was like yelling at everyone, all this sort of stuff. Like he was a visionary, and like he needed that firing to go and then build his next company called Next, and everything else, and then to come full circle, mature as an entrepreneur, as a man, as a leader, and everything like that. And when he came back to Apple, he was a completely different person, and that's when Apple was really took its second wind on. So yeah, I hope I'll have a similar story. I don't think I'll do anything as large as what Steve Jobs did, but I have some big plans for this next chapter of my life for sure.
amazing, amazing. So you're basically working on the Spirit of Satoshi right now, right?
Yeah, that I've got my fingers in a number of pies. So the Spirit of Satoshi
Yeah.
is a Bitcoin language model project. We're trying to build like a suite of language model. Like we're trying to build a suite of language models that are more Bitcoin and liberty oriented, alongside like trying to wrap that in a few different tools that maybe content creators and Bitcoin companies can use, like maybe like a Bitcoin coding assistant, for like because Bitcoin has some real specific sort of coding stuff. And yeah, there's a few ideas there. But alongside that, I'm building something which is in stealth at the moment, but it's kind of like a Bitcoin. I don't want to say nomad list, because I don't like the nomading thing, as I mentioned. But it's kind of like a place where Bitcoiners can find everything they want about different cities, that are like sort of Bitcoin destinations, right? So the holding name for that is Destination Bitcoin. So I'm working on that. I've got the Bitcoin Times, which is my annual Bitcoin publication. And this, I think, is where, the best annual Bitcoin content comes out in that, hands down. Like, I get the best fucking thinkers. And this year is the Energy Edition. We got like Marty Ben, Brian Gitt, Andrew Myers, Drew Armstrong. We got like pieces, like there was one piece that got released this week called the on entropy. Fucking powerful, like discussion on just energy, entropy, and time, like the three qualities of existence that are inescapable. So I encourage people to go take a look at that, bitcointimes.io, if they want to dig more into that. And I've got my Bushido of Bitcoin book that'll come out next year, and I think this is the best thing I've ever written. I found an awesome editor, so we're in the editing process at the moment. So that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers when it comes out next year. But yeah, man, I've got my fingers in a lot of pies. I've become much better at delegating than I was when I was younger, but I'm still kind of like leveling that skill up. And yeah, man, I expect a couple of projects plus a couple of books like to come out next year. I'm going to be all over the place.
Amazing. Man, I'm all for it. If you ever want to talk about any of these in more depth, I know you have to go. So thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, man,
This
I
was
would
very
love to.
insightful.
Yeah, I'd love to next year, as all of these sort of things start to trickle out. Like, keep an eye out and
100%.
just ping me anytime, and we'll have another conversation
Definitely.
more dedicated to each thing.
And you will come over for a nice retreat
100%,
at some
bro.
point.
Yeah. When you guys are ready, let me know. I mean, do you know what? Unfortunately, I still haven't been to Croatia, so it's
Oh,
very
that's
high up
good.
on my
That's good.
list. It's in the top three. So I'll be coming to Madeira next year, and I will look to see if the wife and I can come to Croatia for at least a couple of weeks.
And we'll talk soon. Perfect.
100%.
All right.
All right,
Thank you,
Max.
buddy. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you.